But also I have to mention that we have lifted up two very important Iranian women, both the Nobel Peace Prize that goes to Narges Mohammadi, who is in jail because she is fighting for the right of the women. And we also have, unfortunately, posthumous, the Sakharov Prize to Jina Masha Amini. She was awarded that last week. And we have the situation in Afghanistan with the Taliban, who is depressively oppressing the women and girls in Afghanistan. So there are many things that we have to fight for. And some people say, oh, why are you having a feminist foreign policy when there are so many different things in the world? Because in all those conflicts, women and girls are the ones that are hardest hit. So when we decided in Sweden in 1914, and my predecessor Margot Wallström decided to start with a feminist foreign policy, we said that in conflicts in the world, women and girls are the most hardest hit. When it comes to environment, women and girls are the most hardest hit. When it comes to economic inequality, women and girls are the most hardest hit. So that's the reason why we started a feminist foreign policy. And we said we need to have some objectives. So it's not just a label. We need to have some objectives. And we need to do it systematically. And we need not to just talk about it and have it as a perspective, but something that is really making change. And I would first tell you the 6 external objectives that we had for the last 3 years when we were in government. You know, the first decision, the new government, the right-wing government that is depending on the nationalist, populist party for support, the first thing they took was to abolish the feminist foreign policy. But the 6 objectives we have is 1, full enjoyment of human rights by all women and girls. 2, freedom from physical, psychological, and sexual violence for all women and girls. 3, participation of all women and girls in preventing and resolving conflicts and post-conflict peace building. 4, political participation by women and girls and influence in all areas of society. 5th, economic rights and empowerment for women and girls. And 6, sexual and reproductive health and rights for women and girls. So then we had our goals, our objectives, and I can talk lengthy about each of them, but we will have a full day so you can hear more about them. But we need also some tools, because it's not enough just to have a goal. You need to do it, you must implement it. And then we said, okay, let's make it easy. Let's make 3 R's. Rights, representation, resources. And everything we do, we put these 3 R's, and then we know, I mean, how to implement it in a systematic way. When it comes to rights, it's a simple fact that human rights also are women's rights. I mean, I think it was Hillary Clinton in 1995 said it, and then it was, people get, oh, human rights are women's rights. Okay, we hadn't thought about that. Now we don't even think that that was something we had to fight for. We have 2 fundamental tracks that has to be followed when pursuing a feminist foreign policy. First, there are areas where we must aim for prohibition, such as gender-based discrimination, forced marriage, genital mutilation. And secondly, there are areas where the aim is progress, where we need equal rights, for example, for inheritance, access to education and health, sexual reproductive rights, those issues. The second, representation. All individuals must have the same right to participation, education, and influence in decision-making. Women are chronically underrepresented when it comes to key forums where decisions are made. And this goes for all areas, in business, in politics, in peace negotiation, in company boards, everywhere. And finally, the resources. resources has to be allocated to promote equal opportunities. Most areas, people think that, okay, we give as much to men and women, but when you count on it, it's always women who get less. Look for development aid, look how much you spend on education, and so on and so forth, everywhere. I have been a minister for nearly 7 years, Minister of Trade, Minister of EU Affairs, Minister of Foreign Affairs. And I know that if you put a gender lens on, that transforms the world. It transforms the world if you put your gender glass on. And that is if you go for trade agreements, if you try to solve the conflict in Israel and Palestine, if you try to end the war in Ukraine, if you try to get more women into economy, it always changes the world if you put your gender glasses on. So then people of order, my final minute, says, but has it changed something? And I can say, yes, it has. There was a study with more than 200 interviews done by the expert group for age studies, EBA in Sweden, and they put Göteborg University to do it. And the name of the finding is more than a label, less than a revolution. I think that's a very good title. And the main finding is that for feminist foreign policy implementation is more than simply relabeling existing gender equality activity as feminist, but that the implementation has been a little bit difficult. Overall, there is a marked increase in gender equality work among foreign policy agencies and aid and embassies since the foreign feminist policy was launched. And the term feminist, the term, that signals a raised ambition and push the integration of Swedish aid, trade and security policy. So in total, the gender equality activities increased markedly when there was the feminist foreign policy launch. But the terminology itself had consequences, signaling a new start, greater ambition, and more combative stance when it comes to gender equality. So let's hope that more countries are following suit and we develop in this very, very important project that we start today with you, a feminist foreign policy all over the world. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for this first input on the origin of the concept and how it has been implemented. We're going to follow with Benedicta, and we are also bringing the perspective from the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, FEPS and FES, for inviting me to serve as co-chair for this very important gathering and collective for the feminist foreign policy. I think that just as many things, the beginning is always not clear where we are going. And I think that when you look at all the publications on the issue of feminist foreign policy, there has been some naysayers. There has been some that have said, yes, but we've been having conversations about gender equality for several years. What change has it sort of achieved? How much more talk about a feminist foreign policy? But as Anne mentioned, feminist foreign policy has indeed achieved significant milestones over the past few years since its launch. And as Secretary General of Socialist International, representing progressive political parties from across the world, it is important that this contest or the conversation around FFP is had not just from the perspective of the implementers of feminist foreign policy, but we also look at the recipients around whom we actually formulate our policies. Feminist foreign policy has proven to be a policy that embodies the recognition of the world's progress as fundamental and as being tied to the empowerment of women. It is a vision that understands that gender equality, it's not just a woman's issue, but a societal, economic, and moral imperative. It calls on us to reevaluate our global interactions through a lens of equality, justice, and inclusivity. It is important that in our discussions, the discussion on the Global South is had within the context that enables the cooperation and improved multilateralism that the world is demanding today. If we look at the Global South, it is a diverse region that is home to a significant portion of our global population. It is a region marked by economic disparity, gender inequality, and unique challenges specific to each country. But the Global South, with its myriad of nations and communities, is not a passive recipient of aid or policies handed down by the West. It is a region filled with agents of change, leaders, and advocates who are striving to create a more equitable world. And it is here that the principles of feminist foreign policy can become a catalyst for transformative progress. The need for FFP is evident when we look at the challenges faced by women worldwide. Women, particularly in conflict and post-conflict zones, are disproportionately affected by violence, displacement, and the erosion of their rights. To build a more just and equitable society, we must prioritize their safety, inclusion, and agency in shaping their own destinies. When we consider feminist foreign policy, there are a number of key factors that we have in mind. That gender equality is a catalyst for development. In the Global South, the pursuit of gender equality is not just about fairness. It is about unlocking the full potential of the health of the population. When we invest in the well-being and opportunities of women, we invest in the future of the entire communities and nations. On the other issue of intersectionality, the challenges faced in the Global South are multifaceted, often interwoven with several issues of poverty, access to education, healthcare, political representation, among others. And feminist foreign policy encourages us to view these challenges through an intersectional lens, recognizing that they are inextricably linked. Feminist foreign policy also involves the idea of inclusive development. In the Global South, development efforts must be inclusive, and sustainable foreign policy that integrates feminist principles recognizes the need for inclusive economic development, healthcare, and education. FFP also speaks to local empowerment. One of the fundamental tenets of FFP is local empowerment in the Global South. It is essential to work with local organizations, activists, and communities that drive change within this context to ensure that FFP does not become a policy that is handed down and left without mothers to mother its flourish. However, this journey is not without its own obstacles. Structural and systemic barriers, deeply entrenched gender norms, and economic challenges can make progress slow and at times frustrating. Yes, we must not relent in our efforts. FFP must offer us a pathway to rethink our interactions with the Global South. It should challenge us to not just be charitable donors, but committed partners to progress. It must call on all of us to listen to the voice of the people in the Global South, respecting their sovereignty and agency. We must also create, through the platform of our advocacy for feminist foreign policy, a framework that urges nations to listen, to collaborate, and to support the efforts of local organizations, activists, and leaders who are working tirelessly to advance the cause of gender equality. By doing so, we can harness the incredible power of grassroots movements and ensure that foreign policy discussions are made with the best interest of local communities at heart. In closing, we must recognize that feminist foreign policy in the Global South is not just a theoretical construct. It is a practical necessity for our shared humanity. It is about dismantling oppressive structures and fostering relationship based on respect and equity. It is a reminder that the ever-shrinking world, our destinies are inextricably linked together. So as we reflect on the questions of convergence between the Global South and Global North as it relates to FFP, let us challenge the status quo. Let us embrace the opportunity to be part of the global transformation, one where feminist foreign policy becomes the bedrock upon which we build a more just and equitable world. We must recognize that feminist foreign policy is not a zero-sum game. It is a win-win for all. It is a path to a world where women's rights are human rights, where local actors have a seat at the table, and where a foreign policy reflects the principles of equality and justice. It is a call to action, a call to redefine our priorities, and a call to make the world a better place for everyone. Thank you.
Let us challenge the status quo. Cheers to that. And we follow with Jennifer, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much to FEPS for the invitation to be here and to be able to share a platform with Benedicta and Anne. And I think it's truly remarkable to realize that we're now approaching the end of the first decade of feminist foreign policy. In less than 10 years, we've seen a huge explosion of interest in the idea of FFP from civil society, from the media, and of course from the growing number of states which are now adopting it as a policy agenda. And the idea of a feminist approach to international relations would once have been laughed at by mainstream thinking. But as events obviously like today show, increasingly FFP is an agenda that cannot be ignored. However, in spite of this growing interest, I think it's fair to say that there's still some confusion about what FFP actually means. The so-called F word has meant very different things to very different people across different times. It's inspired a diverse range of political activity, from suffragettes to peace activists to women in the boardroom. It's been decried as divisive from people on the left and the right, sometimes at the same time. In my academic work, I'm interested in the meaning of feminism in foreign policy. And the longer that I think about this, the more I become convinced that there are as many definitions of feminism as there are feminists. So, what does feminism mean in this particular context then? What does it mean when we're thinking about feminist foreign policy? Does it mean pacifism? Does it mean more women in the ranks of states' foreign affairs ministries or in the halls of the United Nations? Does it simply mean a state's continuation of their work on the women, peace and security agenda? Is it possible for a state to have a feminist foreign policy without thinking about changing approaches to their trade or development work? And I think it's important for us to remember that FFP isn't just one thing. It isn't a homogenous, one-size-fits-all approach to policy. There is no central document or treaty that states have to sign up to when they declare an FFP. Yes, more countries are joining all the time, but what FFP means is not necessarily the same thing for all of them. We might all be present in the same spaces, but we're not necessarily always talking the same language. In South America, for example, where we're seeing huge enthusiasm and uptake around FFP, feminist foreign policy is often linked to human rights discourse and to those countries' long-standing commitments to human rights treaties. In Germany, FFP discourse is walking a fine line between promoting rights and equality, but also acknowledging war within Europe and the need for rearmament and weapons supply to Ukraine. In France, Spain, and elsewhere in the EU, FFP means a recommitment to multilateral systems, especially the European Union, and to their liberal practices and values. And to say that FFP means has slightly different shapes and slightly different priorities across the states that are adopting it isn't necessarily a criticism of it as a practice. We're dealing here with an increasingly diverse group of states, all with very different national histories when it comes to thinking about women's rights and equality more generally. It's perhaps not to be expected that they would all talk about the same things when they talk about feminism. In fact, from a practitioner or a political perspective, this diversity to FFP is clearly a benefit. There's the potential here for a policy agenda which can speak to the specific historical trajectory of a state and to speak to its foreign policy goals and aims. At the same time, though, there's a danger that because FFP is a fluctuating policy agenda, that it charges off in different directions and means different things to each state that takes it on. Or that a state simply adopts the term feminist with little self-interrogation as to what that actually means for their specific circumstances. And here I think there's two things to help stop FFP from becoming too diffuse and for it maintaining that critical impulse. And firstly, I think of the growing coalitions and multilateral spaces that are forming around FFP. And I'm thinking here specifically of the FFP Plus group at the United Nations, the Global Partner Network on FFP, which is facilitated by the FFP Collaborative, but also the Collective being launched here today, and similar networks in Australia and South America. These help to bring FFP states together to create common ground and understanding and ensure that even across national difference, we have that ongoing conversation about FFP's meanings and its challenges. And secondly, and in tandem with these networks, I think that civil society can help to keep that focus for FFP discourse. When we turn to civil society and its understandings of FFP, we often see more expansive definitions than we see states talk of. So for example, we see discussions of colonial legacy, of patriarchy, of systemic change. And I think this is the key space for civil society, to push FFP states to be bolder, to think more in terms of structural power relations, and to think bigger when trying to transform the existing status quo in international relations. In short, to maintain a critical focus on what the big picture is for feminist foreign policy. This is obviously not a simple goal, and creating coherence across a growing and diverse body of states is no simple task. But as we've talked about already, FFP has grown at a remarkable rate over the past decade. And I think this suggests a willingness on the part of states to change, to embrace new ideas, and perhaps most importantly, an understanding that something different, something new is required to tackle the challenges of our times. And that willingness to change, I think, should give us cause to hope. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm a big fan of this message of hope, especially in these turbulent times that we are living. So we don't have much time, unfortunately, but I asked for 5 extra minutes because we started a bit late. But when I see my colleague here, that means that it's, so, but we'll try. So Jennifer, you were mentioning, you were speaking about the diversity of the concept, no? The different interpretations, the different ways of implementing. So, and you point out the risks, but also this as an opportunity. So, and here, maybe I'm challenging a little bit the title of our panel, redefining or defining its meaning. Should we agree on a common least denominator, or should we keep the concept flowing in order to be more flexible and adapt to the different realities? And I want to also focus on the F word, as you said, because I read that some countries are implementing gender equality principles in their foreign action, but they don't include this label feminist. Why does it make sense to keep it? Why is it clear that it's not just about equality between men and women? So I leave it open, please, like interact among you. I don't know, Anne, Benedicta, Jennifer, whoever wants to start first, please.
Well, thank you. Should I? Is it on? I take this one. Yeah, this is on. No, I think as it was said in this evaluation from the university, that the word feminism as such actually signals something, that it is a government that wants to have a higher, they want to do more when it comes to equality. But I totally agree with Jennifer that it should not just be you tell it we have a feminist foreign policy and it could be anything. I mean, I talked with a former foreign minister colleague from an African country who were very much, we need to have a feminist foreign policy. I said, okay, what do you put in it and so on? And it was actually only, I would say, an election stunt to attract women. There was no meaning behind it, there was no thinking, there was nothing. So it's really important that you should not just call it feminist, because then it's not more than a label. But if you call it feminist, you also say, okay, now we have a certain way of looking at things. And for me, feminism is kind of a structural change. It's not individual women all the time, but we need to see women and girls as a collective that needs to be raised in different ways. So it's all those things, as I said, representation and rights and resources that we need to have. So I'm very much in favor that we use the word feminism, but I'm also think that we should put some pressure on those who want to join the club, that it should not just be a label and then you don't do anything about it. You need to have an evaluation that is, seriously thought behind it.
Thank you. I think in response to those 2 points, so firstly, the importance of adopting the feminist label, I think that is increasingly important, not just for normative commitments, but also signalling that states are willing to be part of this club. And I don't mean that in a kind of blithe way. I mean that they are willing to be part of this coalition, to work with these other countries, and to be present in those multilateral spaces with them. So I think that's important in terms of the label. And I think also in terms of the need to have some sort of coherence and some sort of kind of core structure to FFP, then I think the Swedish 3Rs model kind of helps and kind of represents that there. I think that there is that provides potential for some sort of coherence, some sort of central unifying principles that states can anchor their feminist foreign policies around, but also allowing for flexibility and for states to adapt to their particular needs when it comes to foreign policy. So I think taking that as perhaps the kind of central point of focus for FFP is helpful.
Yes, I completely agree with Jennifer and Anne. I think that for politicians, it's always good to get them to commit to something. And so the label is very important, because if it is adopted, then you can say, yes, you signed up to this, and this is what it requires. And so we can judge you by these standards. And so the first point, it is important to push for the adoption of the label, quote and unquote. On the second point, I think that it is within our own interest to have some flexibility whilst defining the scope within which the policies or the minimum benchmark that we use to measure these policies. And this flexibility, I believe, would then take into account some of the nuances and historical backgrounds of states and their interest and the focus areas. I listened to Anne, yes. Some would use it as an elections tool, but maybe through that we can achieve more representation, which is one arm of the argument. To say that, yes, without meeting, let's say, a full set of policy measures, or your FFP policy not being consistent with, let's say, the model being implemented by another country, is to say that there is a standard set of policies that all countries should subscribe to. What we're saying is, let's promote the idea, and as recognizing that it is politicians that would really drive this, it's the government that would make sure that we can achieve the successes that we want to achieve with FFP. I think it's important to allow them some room, because as a politician myself, you don't want to, have this fixed set of policies that, it's like once you subscribe to FFP, then you have to do X, Y, Z. Yes, there are some minimums, but let's allow the room for some diversity, even in the policy choices.
Very much.
Thank
I think we need to conclude soon, but very quickly, before they kick me out, one quick question. You end up with a message of hope before. The world is such a mess right now. But can this be an opportunity in the sense of, like, can we, I don't know, try to push to convince to those who are not yet convinced about why we need feminist foreign policy, saying that status quo is not an option. Guys, you see where the war is going. Do you think we can use this opportunity somehow, very quickly?
I mean, yes, I hope so, maybe just because it's Monday morning and I want to be hopeful. But I think, yes, I mean, just think to say again what I ended on, I think the fact that states, I think, here are showing a willingness to change, a willingness to adapt. And I think increasingly, if you look at the rhetoric that they're using around feminist foreign policy, it's related to exactly what you're saying, and understanding that doing things the way things have always been done isn't cutting it, isn't working. So yes, I think there is massively cause for hope in regards to that, yes.
I also think there is hope, and I think we need to make it more familiar. I mean, the differences. I think it's a very, very good sign that President Zelensky of Ukraine, who has a peace plan with 10 points. The 8th point is how to deal with the ecocide and the environmental consequences of the war. And he had put the former foreign minister of Sweden, Margot Wallström, who actually was the first foreign minister who launched the feminist foreign policy, together with his very, very strong chief of staff, Yermak. Those two together is now having an international group of how the ecocide issue, environmental issue, of the war of Ukraine is being handled, and how there should be accountability. And to choose a woman like Margot Wallström for this position, I think tells something about how important it is.
Yes, I agree that there is hope. And I think that we have to look at FFP within the context of a development strategy, whether it is the implementing states or recipient states, that we anchor our message and our policies around the fact that this policy or an adoption of FFP enables us to really transform our societies by empowering as many people as we can, women and men, to really contribute towards the development of our own nations and the nations of others. So if we begin to look at it as a development strategy, then that also then defines the way it is approached. But yes, there is a lot of hope, and I'm very hopeful. Not because it's Monday morning.
Now, I think we need to leave, but the next panel is going to be moderated by my colleague Leticia Thyssen. And as you can see, it's a feminist foreign policy in times of crisis, so you will have a lot to talk about. Many thanks for your attention. I'm sorry we didn't have the time to bring in questions from the audience. I also had 1 million questions I could not ask, but let's use smartly the coffee break later. Thank you very much.